Hi, I'm Susan Clare, GourmetQuilter. Thanks for being here. I thought I'd show you today a little bit of fun with some freewheeling houses. So I've got a few ironed on up here onto a piece of fabric, and as you can see, they're not constructed the way a lot of houses are. They would be a little bit of a concern. They've possibly been through an earthquake, who knows? However, they're kind of fun to do. So anything like this is really fun. So I've just got my 4 rotary cutters that I use here just to show you the different sizes. Most of you will know that these are probably available. The size that most people use for their general cutting for quilting is this 45mm blade one. That's probably, as I said, the most frequently used one. I personally like to use the larger 60mm one for most of my cutting. You can use all of these for what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you. There's also one that's a 25mm blade, which is about 1 inch, which is great for this sort of work. My preferred one for this type of work is this tiny little 18mm blade one. So these are all really good little rotary cutters. These tiny ones don't work so well with a ruler because the blade simply isn't large enough to really run against a ruler properly. But the others can all be used that way. So I just thought I'd mention those because you can use all of those, as I said, for this type of work that we're about to do, but they do have limitations because of their size, where this one gives you a little bit more freedom to move. So what we're going to do is have a go at some of these houses. So we're just free-form cutting. So I've called them freewheeling houses because we're using a little round blade and we're wheeling around. But beyond that, I haven't done any drawing. You could draw if you wanted to, but the idea was that they're really just using up some bits and pieces. They're just a whole lot of fun. And of course it doesn't have to be houses, but I'm showing you houses today because I do happen to like houses. So what I've got here is just some leftover pieces of fabric, and I've put some paperback fusible web on to the wrong side of the fabrics. And as you can see, I've been cutting out some of these houses that are up behind me. So I just randomly ironed some colours onto some fusible web. The fusible web was also left over from a project that I had some bits and pieces for. So it was a great way to use things up. And then I just iron them onto just a background strip of fabric, and that could vary. It can be trimmed down afterwards if it's too large. Probably if you were going to be putting them into a project, they would come down to the bottom edge so that they would be, the bottom edges would be in the seam, but it depends what you're doing. They may not be, they may be sitting above the seam. However, we'll get on to the cutting. The cutting is a huge amount of fun. So we might start off with having a nice little red house. So it doesn't really matter whether you cut on the fabric side or the paper side, only that if you change colours you might want to think about that so that you can see where you're going. So if I was just going to cut, say, just a small house, I might just cut. So all I've got is my rotary cutter. I've just taken the safety catch off and I'm just going to run that along. So always run them away from you, don't ever run towards yourself. You can run across. And then we might make this side just a little bit wonky as well. And then just make sure, because I've ironed this to the edge, there's just a little bit of fabric sticking over, so I might just trim that edge as well. Now you could use your ruler to help you do some straight lines, but I think part of the charm of these is that they are purely wonky. You might want to do a roof. It might be a little pointy roof, so we might come up here and we might want to make sure that you're going to be wide enough. And so I'm just going to do a nice tall pointy roof here. And so at this stage, if you think it's too large, you can trim it down. I am going to just trim that edge again like I did, because that fusible web doesn't come quite to the edge there. And that's going to be a nice little roof that sits on that little house. And you can now sit the roof at a little bit of a jaunty angle. It might be a very cheeky little house. Then I've got some other little bits and pieces here. You might want to make a little door. And that could be just something, it can just be as simple as a rectangle, or you can just round that little top edge with your little cutter there. And things don't always go exactly the way you think they might want to go. You can trim them up later. There's nothing wrong with using a pair of scissors. I'm just showing you how you might do it with one of these cutters. You may want to pop a couple of little windows on, so the windows might be in a pale colour. So what I often do for windows is I just cut myself a strip and then I just cut off some little pieces here. Now those windows might be too big, they might be we might just have one window going across, and that might even still be a little bit deep. So you can just come back. There's very little waste because you can use the little bits and pieces for something else. So we might have 2 windows up the top there that are going across. And if you don't like the size, you can trim them, etc., etc. So it's just playtime, and I thought, seeing as I was playing, I should share my playing with you. So another thought might be that you might want to do something, perhaps, I'm just going to cut these 2 apart here so that I can get into this red. Perhaps a nice little roof, perhaps with a little scallopy edge. So you can just do the little scallopy edge. Again, always just make sure you're cutting away from yourself. It might be a tall house, it might be a short house, it might be any kinds of things, but you can get a nice little scallop going that way there. And we might have this one going along here, and oh, we might have a little chimney on this one. So I can just turn and do a little chimney while I'm here. And we might now want to adjust that. I haven't built the house yet, but we're already building the roof. It's definitely the way houses should be. And we might come down here. So already we've got a nice little roof there. And we might make a nice little house out of this darker one here to go with that. So again, we want to just keep an eye that the house is going to fit within. It could be a taller house this time, so we might come along here. And I'm going to trim that little bottom edge off. Now if it's not quite as wonky as you'd like it to be, we can bring in those little sides. And they don't have to necessarily be quite straight, they can be a little bit curved. And already we've got a great looking little house there. I might have a different colour here for our little windows. These might be slightly bigger windows. Maybe a little bit more square looking. How does that look? Oh, that's a giant window. Let's not have it quite that big. But it could be perhaps a little shop with a big window, and then you need a little door so that people can come in and have a look at what's inside. And so again, just using up some different colours, different shapes, and how fun is that? You can make a 2-story house. So this one's quite tall, we might make a nice tall house out of this one. So again, it might be, perhaps you want something that is actually wonky. So we can just do some really wonky little edges here that just curve around a little bit. Doesn't have to be straight. Houses are not all straight. There's a house I go past when I go driving sometimes that I'm always certain is definitely built on an angle. People live in it, so probably it isn't, but it always looks like it. You might want a nice little, we might have a curved roof on this one. And why wouldn't we? And it's not quite wide enough, and that's okay. So what we can do is make the house a little bit narrower to take the little roof on top. So it could be like almost like a little chimney roof. And we can have a nice door. So as you can see, I'm just having a wonderful time playing, because I would like to encourage you to play and use up some of your little leftovers. What could be more fun than using up leftovers? We might have some grey windows on this one. And we might also make those a little bit wonky, as the walls are so wonky on this one. And so then, of course, you can embellish with some stitching. You can use a pen on them for some other sorts of detail if you wanted to. Some of the permanent marking pens are really good for this sort of thing. But certainly some stitching. I'm not stitching today, I'm just showing you how to do some of this fun cutting. Because it was too good of fun to have all by myself. And so it's really that simple, and you can see there's very little wastage, and even some of those bits, if you wanted to, you could use on something. So I'll just bring over the piece of fabric and we'll iron those on. So I'm just going to turn my board around because I'm ironing a bit more than I do sometimes. But I can bring this over. Wouldn't normally iron on the mat because the heat can go through if you're on it too long. Normally I'm only on there such a short time it doesn't go through. So I'm just going to continue on with my little row of houses here. We've got a whole little selection going on here. Whoops, and it's too tall for my... Oh well, there we go. If it's too tall, we can make it a little bit shorter, because that's how it works. And I might take it down to the bottom edge there. But that's the beauty of it. It is freewheeling, it's free form, really just there to be played with. Whichever way you look at it, it's just a whole lot of fun. But I think there's so many things you could think of doing with this type of work, and to use up some pieces if you like playing. There's children have a lot of fun doing things. You'd need to just watch them as they're using something like the cutter. But children would have a wonderful time doing this sort of thing. If you're looking for projects for children to do with some fabrics, just pop some of the fusible web on the back. I'll just shorten one of those, it's a bit long to fit in there. And then I've peeled the papers off them, then we can just iron that in place. And you can see you can make a whole village, you could make borders, you could just make blocks, you can do cushions. Really, you can do anything you like. So we'll get these ironed on so that you can see a few more little houses in a row. As I said, even these nice little curvy bits. Oops. Some on of it. You don't need to draw them. You could draw first if you wanted to. It's not necessary. It's just fun to put things together that are just a little bit all over the place. Unless you don't like that, of course, in which case it wouldn't be a lot of fun at all. Oh, we're nearly there. And then you can decide which house you'd like to live in and who might be your neighbours. So don't be afraid to use your rotary cutters in that way. They are a lot of fun to use this way as well, to just do free form cutting. There's other things you can use them for, of course, like that too. But this is just a way of using some little pieces to turn them into something super fun. And so there, I could pin that back up so we can have a good look at it on the wall. Hopefully get it straight. I think that's a great way to use up all sorts of bits. If you like a little bit of applique, that's good. I would just personally machine stitch around them. I would probably free motion stitch around them. You can do of course, whatever you prefer to do with your applique. It is all fused on, but it does all need stitching as well. I'm hoping that's straight. And there's kind of like an instant village just made out of some leftovers. It's quaint. You could have all sorts of other embellishments on it. You could get all sorts of people involved. It would be a great community type quilt. Lots of friends could be involved. Everyone could do a little house that gets ironed onto something and then stitched. But freewheeling houses, just a little bit of fun. Thank you.